In the grand tapestry of British royal history, woven with threads of power, scandal, and sacrifice, the life of Mary of Teck stands as a testament to the enduring strength of duty. Born into a family teetering on the edge of ruin, dismissed as an inconsequential princess in the glittering courts of Victorian England, Mary rose above adversity to become one of the most formidable queens consort of the House of Windsor. Her journey, spanning the candlelit corridors of the 19th century to the dawn of a televised modern monarchy, was marked by exile, heartbreak, and the weight of an empire's expectations. Through it all, she wielded patience and pragmatism as her greatest weapons, transforming personal trials into the bedrock of an institution that weathered wars, abdications, and social upheaval. This is the story of a woman who turned the label of spare princess into a legacy of ironclad relevance, shaping the destiny of a dynasty with quiet resolve. Mary of Teck was born on December 26, 1867, in the storied halls of Kensington Palace, a birthplace shared with her illustrious cousin, Queen Victoria. Yet the circumstances of her arrival were far from auspicious. Her family, the Teckses, were a minor branch of German royalty, clinging to their titles with little else to sustain them. Her father, Prince Francis, Duke of Teck, was a charming but penniless nobleman whose royal status was more ceremonial than substantial, akin to a gilded frame without a canvas. Her mother, Princess Mary Adelaide of Cambridge, known in society's less charitable circles as Fat Mary for her robust figure and flamboyant tastes, was a woman of boundless energy and extravagant habits. Her penchant for lavish gowns and grand entertainments far outstripped the family's meager resources, plunging them into a spiral of debt that became the subject of London's gossip mills. The Teck household was a study in contrast. Outward displays of aristocratic grandeur masked a reality of financial instability. Creditors lurked like specters at the family's doorstep, and the Tecks frequently relocated between residences to evade their obligations. For young Mary, this meant a childhood spent in the shadow of uncertainty, her early years marked by the constant threat of public humiliation. Whispers in aristocratic circles painted a grim future for the young princess. With her German lineage, modest appearance, and lack of wealth, she was deemed an unlikely candidate for a prestigious royal marriage. In the rigid hierarchy of Victorian society, where princesses were judged by beauty, dowies, and political alliances, Mary seemed destined to remain a footnote, a Cinderella without a fairy godmother. Yet even in these formative years, Mary displayed qualities that would define her legacy. Denied the trappings of wealth, she turned inward, seeking solace in the world of books. She devoured works of history, philosophy, and court etiquette, amassing a reservoir of knowledge that compensated for her lack of material splendor. These intellectual pursuits were not mere pastimes. They were acts of defiance against her circumstances, a way to forge an identity beyond the constraints of her family's reputation. Mary's quiet determination and self-discipline became the scaffolding of her character, preparing her for a future she could only dimly perceive. By 1883, when Mary was 16, the Teck family's financial woes reached a breaking point. Unpaid bills from tailor, jewelers, and caterers piled up, transforming their private struggles into a public scandal. The press, ever eager for aristocratic missteps, gleefully reported on the family's predicament, mocking their attempts to maintain a facade of nobility. Unable to withstand the scrutiny, the Tecks made a humiliating decision. They fled England for the continent, seeking refuge in borrowed villas and rented estates in Italy and Germany. This exile was a blow to their dignity, reducing them to the status of itinerant guests, dependent on the charity of relatives and acquaintances. For Mary, the years in Europe were both a trial and a crucible. Stripped of the comforts of home, she lived as a transient in foreign courts. Her wardrobe deemed dowdy by the fashion-conscious elite, the European aristocracy, no less judgmental than their British counterparts, viewed her as an outsider, a German princess with neither wealth nor allure. Yet Mary refused to be defined by these slights. She honed her social graces, learning to navigate awkward encounters with the poise of a diplomat. Her studies continued unabated. She immersed herself in the histories of European dynasties, mastering the intricacies of royal protocol and political alliances. These years of hardship instilled in her a resilience that would prove invaluable, teaching her to smile through adversity and to find strength in self-reliance. The exile also exposed Mary to the broader currents of European culture. She visited museums, attended concerts, and absorbed the architectural splendor of Florence and Munich. These experiences broadened her perspective, giving her a cosmopolitan outlook that contrasted with the insular world of the British court. By the time the text returned to England in 1885, Mary had transformed from a timid girl into a young woman of quiet confidence, ready to face the challenges of a society that had once dismissed her. Upon their return, the text found their social standing little improved. Mary, now 18, was considered past the prime age for a royal bride, her prospects dimmed by her family's notoriety and her own unremarkable appearance. Yet fate intervened in the form of Queen Victoria, the matriarch whose influence shaped the destinies of Europe's royals. Victoria saw in Mary a potential asset, a princess untainted by scandal, with a keen intellect and a steadfast demeanor. While Mary lacked the glamour of other European princesses, her impeccable reputation and disciplined nature made her an ideal candidate to stabilize the increasingly turbulent House of Windsor. The Queen's choice for Mary's suitor was Prince Albert Victor, known as Eddie, the eldest son of the Prince of Wales, later Edward, and second in line to the throne. Eddie was a figure of contradictions, a handsome, charismatic prince who captivated society, yet a man dogged by rumors of debauchery. Whispers of illicit affairs, gambling debts, and even tenuous links to the Jack the Ripper murders swirled around him, though no evidence substantiated the most lurid claims. To Victoria, Eddie's wooed reputation was a liability that required a steadying influence, and she believed Mary was the perfect antidote, a virtuous bride who could anchor him to his duties. The courtship was orchestrated with precision. Mary and Eddie were brought together at country house parties, garden strolls, and formal dinners, their interactions carefully choreographed to foster a connection. For Mary, the match was less about romance than responsibility. She understood the stakes. A marriage to Eddie would elevate her family status and secure her place in the royal hierarchy. Eddie, for his part, seemed amenable, though his affections were rumored to lie elsewhere. On December 3, 1891, at the stately Luton Hoo estate, Eddie proposed and Mary accepted. The engagement was a triumph for the texts, a chance to escape their pariah status and align with the heart of the British monarchy. But joy was fleeting. In January 1892, a deadly influenza epidemic swept through the royal retreat at Sandringham. Eddie, already frail, succumbed swiftly, dying on January 14th, just days after his 28th birthday. The loss was a national tragedy, plunging the court into mourning and shattering Mary's carefully constructed future. She had begun to prepare for her role as Eddie's consort, studying the responsibilities of a future queen. Now she was left to drift, her dreams buried alongside her fiancé. At Eddie's funeral, Mary placed her bridal wreath on his coffin, a poignant gesture that spoke of her private grief and public duty. The press dubbed her the unhappiest bride that never was. Yet Mary's composure never wavered, her stoic facade masking the depth of her sorrow. Eddie's death created a crisis of succession. With the heir presumptive gone, the mantle fell to his younger brother, Prince George, a naval officer unaccustomed to the spotlight. George was a man of simple tastes, more at ease on a ship's deck than in a ballroom. His reserved nature a stark contrast to Eddie's flamboyance. Queen Victoria, ever strategic, saw an opportunity to repurpose Mary for this new heir. Her proven loyalty and unblemished character made her the ideal partner to guide George through the daunting responsibilities ahead. The early months of 1892 were a period of adjustment for both Mary and George. Bound by shared grief, George for his brother, Mary for her fiancé, they were gently nudged together by the royal family. Their meetings were tentative, picnics under chaperone gazes, bird-watching expeditions, and quiet walks through Windsor's gardens. At first, their interactions were marked by awkwardness, each haunted by Eddie's memory. Yet over time, a genuine bond emerged, rooted in mutual respect and a shared sense of duty. George admired Mary's intellect and resilience. Mary appreciated George's sincerity and dedication. In the summer of 1893, during a stroll at Windsor, George proposed. His words were plain, devoid of poetic flourish, but they carried a sincerity that resonated with Mary. She accepted not out of blind obligation, but with a cautious hope that this union could be more than a political necessity. Their wedding, held on July 6, 1893, at the Chapel Royal in St. James's Palace, was a spectacle of understated elegance. Who confided in her diary her relief at his release from suffering. To the public, her response was stoic. This is not just to modernize. It might seem callous, a reflection of the emotional restraint demanded of her role. The death of King Edward VII on May 6, 1910, thrust George and Mary into the roles of King George and Queen Mary, a transition that was anything but seamless. Edward's reign, though brief, had been marked by a blend of charisma and controversy, and his passing left a void in the monarchy's public image. For Mary, the moment was both a pinnacle and a challenge. She had spent years preparing for this role, first as the fiancée of Prince Albert Victor, then as the wife of George, the unexpected heir. Yet the path to Buckingham Palace was obstructed by an unforeseen obstacle. Queen Alexandra, Edward's widow, who refused to relinquish her place at the heart of the royal stage. Alexandra, a beloved figure known for her beauty and charm, was reluctant to cede her position as the monarchy's matriarch. She lingered at Buckingham Palace, delaying Mary's move and retaining control over significant royal jewels, including pieces symbolic of the Queen Consort's authority. This standoff was more than a logistical inconvenience. It was a subtle power struggle testing Mary's patience and diplomacy. Alexandra's attachment to her role was understandable. She had been the face of the monarchy for decades, and her grief for Edward was profound. Yet her refusal to vacate the palace underscored the precariousness of Mary's new position, as she stood poised to assume a role still occupied by a formidable predecessor. Mary, true to her character, navigated this delicate situation with characteristic restraint. She did not confront Alexandra or demand her departure. Instead, she waited, her resolve unshaken by the delay. Her patience was not passive but strategic, reflecting a deep understanding of the monarchy's need for continuity and harmony. When Alexandra finally moved to Marlborough House, Mary entered Buckingham Palace with quiet dignity, ready to redefine the role of Queen Consort in her own image. One of her first acts was to choose her regal name, a decision that carried symbolic weight. Some quarters suggested Victoria, invoking the legacy of the great queen who had shaped the modern monarchy. Mary, however, rejected this, opting instead for her own name, Mary. The choice was deliberate, signaling a new era for the House of Windsor, one that would build on the past but forge a distinct identity. It was a subtle assertion of her individuality, a declaration that she would not merely emulate her predecessors, but carve her own path as queen. The outbreak of World War I in August 1914 thrust Mary into a role that demanded both public leadership and personal sacrifice. The conflict, unprecedented in its scale and devastation, challenged the monarchy to prove its relevance in a time of national crisis. As queen, Mary emerged as a symbol of resilience, embodying the stoic determination that would come to define Britain's wartime spirit. One of her most visible contributions was her commitment to austerity. Recognizing the suffering of her subjects, Mary took decisive steps to align the royal household with the nation's sacrifices. She slashed palace menus, replacing lavish banquets with simple fare, and enforced strict rationing within the royal residences. These measures were not merely symbolic. They reflected her belief that the monarchy must lead by example, sharing in the hardships endured by ordinary citizens. Her actions resonated deeply, reinforcing the monarchy's role as a unifying force in a nation fractured by war. Mary's compassion extended beyond the palace walls. She made frequent visits to hospitals where she met with wounded soldiers, many of whom had suffered catastrophic injuries. These encounters were emotionally taxing, exposing her to the raw human cost of the conflict. She listened to soldiers' stories, offered words of comfort, and in some cases sat silently by their bedsides, her presence a quiet reassurance. These visits left an indelible mark on Mary, who confided in her diary about the nightmares that haunted her sleep, visions of mangled limbs and anguished faces that lingered long after she left the wards. Yet she persisted, driven by a sense of duty to honor the sacrifices of those who served. Her public role, however, was not without controversy. In 1917, as the war raged and revolutionary fervor swept Russia, Mary and George faced a moral and political dilemma. Whether to offer asylum to Tsar Nicholas II, George's first cousin, and a near-identical look-alike, whose family was imperiled by the Bolshevik uprising. The decision was fraught with complexity. Granting asylum could provoke anti-monarchist sentiment in Britain, where socialist and Republican movements were gaining traction. It could also strain relations with the new Russian regime, complicating the war effort. After anguished deliberation, Mary and George declined to intervene, a choice driven by their prioritization of the monarchy's stability over personal loyalty. The consequences were tragic. In July 1918, Nicholas, his wife Alexandra, and their 5 children were executed by the Bolsheviks in Ekaterinburg. The Romang's fate cast a long shadow over Mary and George's legacy, raising questions about their moral responsibility. Historians remain divided. Some view the decision as a cold calculation, prioritizing political expediency. Others argue it was an agonizing necessity, reflecting the impossible choices of wartime leadership. For Mary, the loss was deeply personal. She had corresponded with Nicholas and Alexandra, sharing family milestones and royal burdens. The knowledge that she had played a role, however indirect, in their demise weighed heavily, though she buried her guilt beneath the armor of duty. Amid the public demands of queenship, Mary cultivated a private passion that revealed both her personality and her commitment to the monarchy's heritage, collecting antiques. Her interests were eclectic, ranging from intricately crafted snuff boxes to rare coins and jeweled tiaras that sparkled with historical significance. These acquisitions were more than personal indulgences. They were a mission to preserve the artifacts of Britain's royal past, ensuring that the monarchy's legacy endured for future generations. Mary's approach to collecting was methodical and discerning. She scoured auction houses, corresponded with antiquarians, and visited country estates where she would admire heirlooms with a keen eye. Her enthusiasm was infectious, though it occasionally discomforted her hosts. Courtiers recounted stories of Mary's pointed admiration, a polite but unmistakable hint that a cherished family relic might better serve the nation in royal hands. Many owners, flattered or flustered, offered their treasures, which Mary accepted with gracious insistence. Her collection grew to include Stuart-era miniatures, Georgian silver and Fabrayer ornaments, each piece a thread in the tapestry of royal history. This passion, however, invited scrutiny. Rumors swirled that Mary's zeal bordered on kleptomania, with whispers of trinkets disappearing from dinner tables or drawing rooms she visited. These tales, likely exaggerated, lacked concrete evidence but persisted in court gossip, painting her as a magpie with a penchant for pilfering. More substantiated was her willingness to pay exorbitant prices for items she deemed essential to the royal collection, sometimes straining the privy purse. Critics argued that her spending was extravagant, especially during wartime austerity. Supporters countered that her acquisitions were investments in the monarchy's cultural capital, preserving relics that might otherwise have been lost. Mary's collecting was a reflection of her dual nature, a queen who balanced personal obsession with institutional duty. Each snuff box or tiara was a tangible link to the past, a reminder of the monarchy's continuity in an era of upheaval. Her efforts ensured that the royal collection remained a repository of history, a legacy that endures in the Royal Collection Trust today. The 1920s brought new challenges as George V's health began to falter. A lifelong smoker, he suffered from chronic bronchitis and cardiovascular strain, ailments exacerbated by the stresses of kingship. Mary, ever the devoted wife, assumed the role of caregiver, mastering medical tasks with the precision of a nurse. She learned to administer injections, monitor vital signs, and manage George's medications, all while shielding him from the palace's political intrigues. Her presence was a constant comfort, her calm demeanor a counterbalance to George's increasing frailty. George's death on January 20, 1936, was a devastating blow. The circumstances surrounding it added a layer of betrayal that Mary would carry silently. Lord Dawson, the royal physician, later admitted to hastening George's death with a lethal injection of morphine and cocaine, a decision made to ensure the king's passing aligned with newspaper deadlines and spared him prolonged suffering. Mary was not consulted, a fact that compounded her grief with a sense of violation. True to her nature, she did not publicly condemn Dawson or dwell on the injustice. Instead, she channeled her sorrow into supporting her sons, Edward and Albert, as they navigated the turbulent years ahead. The reign of Edward VIII, Mary's eldest son, was brief but cataclysmic. Crowned in January 1936, Edward soon revealed his intention to marry Wallis Simpson, a twice-divorced American socialite whose status was anathema to the monarchy's traditional values. For Mary, the prospect was a nightmare, a threat to the institution she had devoted her life to preserving. She saw in Edward's infatuation not just a personal failing, but a constitutional crisis that could unravel the monarchy's authority. Mary pleaded with Edward to reconsider her arguments rooted in the language of duty that had guided her own life. She urged him to prioritize the crown over his personal desires, warning of the ripple effects an abdication would unleash. Edward, however, was resolute, his love for Wallis outweighing his commitment to the throne. In December 1936, he announced his decision to abdicate, a seismic event that shook the monarchy to its core. The abdication was a double wound for Mary, both as a mother and as a queen. She felt the sting of Edward's rejection of the values she had instilled, compounded by the public humiliation of a monarchy in disarray. She never met Wallis, whose presence she viewed as a catalyst for disaster, and her forgiveness for Edward was tempered by disappointment. Yet in private letters she addressed him as David, her pet name for him, revealing a maternal love that endured despite her disapproval. This emotional dichotomy, love for her son, loyalty to the crown, defined her response, a balancing act that few could navigate with such grace. With Edward's departure, the throne passed to Albert, who took the regal name George V, VI. Shy, prone to stammering, and burdened by chronic health issues, Albert was a reluctant king, thrust into a role he had never sought. Mary became his anchor, offering guidance through the intricacies of kingship. She coached him on public speaking, reviewed coronation plans, and provided emotional support as he faced the looming threat of World War II. Her presence was a steadying force, a reminder that the monarchy could endure even the gravest crisis. In her later years, Mary turned her attention to her granddaughters, Princesses Elizabeth and Margaret, whom she saw as the future of the monarchy. She took an active role in their education, imparting lessons in history, art, and the responsibilities of royal life. Her approach was rigorous, but not without warmth. She introduced them to literature, music, and even the occasional jazz record, believing that a modern monarch must engage with contemporary culture. These moments of connection revealed a softer side of Mary, a grandmother who sought to prepare her heirs for a world far different from the one she had known. Mary's health began to decline in the early 1950s, a consequence of lung cancer likely linked to her lifelong exposure to secondhand smoke from George's cigarettes. She faced her illness with the same stoicism that had defined her life, maintaining her public duties until the end. Her death on March 24, 1953, at the age of 85, came just weeks before Elizabeth II's coronation. True to her unwavering commitment to the monarchy, Mary left explicit instructions that her passing should not delay the ceremony. The coronation proceeded as planned, a glittering spectacle that marked the dawn of a new Elizabethan age, with Mary's influence subtly woven into its fabric. Mary of Teck's life was a saga of transformation from a princess scorned by circumstance to a queen who steadied an empire through its darkest hours. Her flaws, her emotional reserve, her rigid adherence to protocol were the product of an era that demanded discipline over sentiment. Yet they were far outweighed by her virtues, an intellect honed by adversity, a resilience forged in exile, and a commitment to duty that never wavered. She navigated a world of upheaval, world wars, abdications, and the shifting tides of public opinion, emerging as a linchpin of the monarchy's endurance. Her contributions from wartime sacrifices to her preservation of royal heritage were not mere gestures, but acts of profound significance, ensuring the institution's relevance in a rapidly changing world. Her influence extended beyond her lifetime, shaping the reigns of her son George VI and her granddaughter Elizabeth II, whose disciplined approach to queenship bore the imprint of Mary's example. In the echoes of palace halls, Mary's footsteps linger, measured, resolute, and indelible. They are the sound of a woman who turned steel into silk, who made duty a beacon in the storm, and who through quiet resolve ensured that the monarchy would endure. Her life is a reminder that true strength lies not in splendor or acclaim, but in the unyielding commitment to carry on no matter the loss.